How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. I've not just got one special guest today, I've got three very special guests. Some may call them a dream team. They are the minds behind Barbell Coalition. How are you all doing?
Very good. Better now after that amazing intro.
Yeah, that was a,
Thank
that
you
was
so
a
much
great
for having us
introduction.
on.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you.
a little bit of a brief introduction, but if you just want to give for everyone listening who might not have heard of Barbell Coalition or your backgrounds, who you are, just want to give just a brief introduction, and then we'll dive in.
Ibi, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Ibi or Ibrahim. I've been powerlifting for quite a while since uni and been coaching for a good several years as well, and had the bright idea of starting a coaching company with these two chaps just about a year and a half ago actually, and then we had our public launch a year ago, and it's been only up from then. I don't know how else to introduce us other than that. I'm sure Stephan might have a better way of doing that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean, I think the interesting part about all of this is we all began coaching individually on our own. So when Ibi obviously, I think, well, to my knowledge, Ibi was the kind of inception of Barbell Coalition, unless that got lost in translation along the way. But yeah, we were all coaching separately. But I think by kind of bringing us all under the same umbrella, yeah, we've not only been able to learn off each other, but obviously just from a growth perspective, it's been, yeah, I mean, bigger than I thought it would be, basically.
Yeah, nice. And with that,
Um,
we'll get dive in.
sorry. Yeah.
No, no.
I'm Mahin. I've also been powerlifting for around 6, 7 years. Gosh, that's a long time. And yeah, I think we've all competed in the sport for a while. We've been in this. We love this sport. I think we've all now grown into more like into the educational side of it. And I think that's kind of like, I think you kind of go in as an athlete, and then afterwards you kind of find your footing. And I think we've all just find a bit of footing now in the educational aspect. And I think that's what really drew us all together. With the Barbell Coalition kind of starting, it started with obviously me and Ibi um, lived quite close together, and we would go back and forth. Ibi helped me a lot with starting my own coaching myself, and then we both kind of like came with the idea of, right, Barbell Coalition, let's start a coaching company, let's go for it. And then obviously Stephan, a mutual at the time, and then looking at all the good things he was doing online, all the educational stuff he was putting out, and we kind of pitched the idea, and then yeah, it's kind of like just keeping it, not faking it till you make it, but just going with the flow, I guess. And I think it's reached to a point now where we found a good stride.
Nice. And with that, because you look at other powerlifting companies, coaching companies out there, if you like. How have you all found working as a team, and how has that kind of improved your coaching? I know for myself, the whole reason why I set up this podcast was to speak to other coaches, network, and learn off other coaches. And I think, sometimes for I don't want to call them just regular gym goers, but people who aren't involved in the sport of powerlifting can sometimes look and think, oh, well, it's just a very individual sport. There's nothing behind that. And I think, younger trainers, younger coaches can look at, it being quite a solitary job. But how have you found like working together, bouncing ideas off each other, and ultimately seeing the results with the athletes that you work with, if that kind of makes sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think you put it well to the point where obviously if we're working with individual athletes, like that relationship is going to be quite individual, right? Quite isolated between the coach and the athlete. But what's been more, I guess, important along this journey hasn't been necessarily the improvement to our own coaching, or although more recently we've started introducing things like coaching roundtables amongst ourselves. So we've recently brought on two additional coaches as well, Tom Knapp and Yando. So they've been really instrumental in terms of improving our own coaching. But I think the more important thing was from a business perspective, keeping ourselves, at least having other people to keep you accountable, stay on top of the task, stay on top of the deadlines, because that's at least from my perspective, has been the biggest kind of driver of our growth, has been our ability to consistently execute to what might seem like a made up deadline, right? Because we're the ones setting them. But consistently hitting those deadlines has just built us good habits in terms of pushing out the content that we want to be pushing out. When we have like a new initiative, such as the mentorship that we launched recently, or coming out with apparel and all of that kind of stuff, just hitting those deadlines time and time again, and not only proving to people that we can do that, but I think the biggest thing has been proving to each other that we can hit these deadlines as long as we keep each other accountable and we keep ourselves very, very honest with each other. And I think at first that was probably the biggest challenge. You know, if for anyone that's gone into business with their mates, essentially, I think the hardest part is being brutally honest with each other, because you want to be nice to them, you want to give them leeway, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt all the time. But the hardest thing to do being in business with someone that you're friends with is to be honest with them, to be basically upfront with them, just so that for the better of the company and for the better of all the people involved, you can kind of continue to drive that forward.
Yeah. I suppose that's similar values or principles that you want to put into your coaching as well. You know, it's the same things applies, you know, having that, you get that buy-in and that trust by having that honesty. I know that's a big value or principle that I kind of focus on. And one thing, when you said they're obviously talking it as a business, you know, everything, the content that you put out there, especially the content that I've seen, you know, very professional, very slick, which is, you know, really nice to see. In terms of, you know, with the sport of powerlifting, sometimes it's a case of, you know, still maybe some old school mentalities in there, and not treating it as, you know, it is a sport. You know, you look at, I'll just use Sheffield as an example because it was only a couple of weeks ago, sorry. You know, how professional that looked, how the athletes went into that. Is that kind of how you want to put yourselves across to the athletes that you work with? And can you kind of see, because I could only go on, again, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but, you know, the work that you do in British powerlifting, trying to make it, you know, some excitement around it. Is that kind of the direction that you go in, wanting to, even though it's not professional, make it professional and in all but name?
For sure. I think to be honest, that was probably the number one focus that we had, right, guys, where it was from the get-go, we viewed, obviously we'd been in powerlifting for a long time, like Mahin said, we love the sport, we ourselves compete in the sport and have done for a while now. And I think that something that's been consistent that we've seen, and like you touched on it, you see a lot of, not unprofessionalism, but it's almost like it's treated almost too much like a hobby. And I think it's potentially something that is holding back the sport. It's been spoken about before, in terms of people not viewing powerlifting as a sport, but viewing it more as a hobby. So we wanted to really bring a different angle to it through our content, through just the way that we either represent ourselves to our clients or kind of just the broader audience that we reach, was making sure that we do present ourselves as a business ultimately, because that's what we are, right? So yeah, trying to, I guess it's a unique situation because you have an audience that perhaps isn't quite there yet in terms of understanding the level of professionalism we want to bring to the sport, because they're just there to enjoy the sport, they're there to participate in the sport, but at the same time trying to bring them along into this idea of having that increased professionalism, whether that's through partnerships with GB Powerlifting or, again, simply just the way that we carry ourselves. And I think it's safe to say, and one of the other guys can probably touch on this, I think it's safe to say that we've seen a positive shift within powerlifting, not just from the athletes, but from other coaching companies, other individual coaches, in terms of the content that they're putting out, the way that they're carrying themselves now. Everyone is kind of shifting in that direction. I think it's been, I'm not trying to say that we've single-handedly made the sport more professional, of course not, but I think trying to be a catalyst in that, it was definitely a massive focus off straight from the get-go.
Yeah.
Most definitely. I think with it, powerlifting, if you think about it as its own almost sub-industry within fitness, as Steph said, is very much seen as a hobby, which is completely fine. And the audience of the sport will continue to think that until somebody shifts that. And obviously SBD, as we've already seen, is already making a huge change in that. And now we're beginning to see athletes, especially younger athletes who are going in to watch the Sheffield, having these dreams of being a professional powerlifter, right? And the best way for that to continue is for other businesses within the industry to continue driving that forward, because it will never just be one company that does that, right? And right now we can definitely say SBD is pretty much the biggest catalyst when it comes to that. And within the realm of coaching, at the very least, we felt like there was a bit of a gap, as Steph said, that we can then become the catalyst within coaching at the very least, where we also then have that direct contact with the athletes. We can then be in direct contact with British powerlifting, where we can almost bridge the gap of communication, where we know that the audience wants certain things. We know that British powerlifting wants to cater towards that, but there isn't any actual communication channel per se, where obviously everyone loves to scroll on Instagram. So what better way to reach them than through that?
Yeah.
And yeah, just by displaying that professionalism and by just going after it and doing things that isn't already being done, with the content, for example, like doing video content on Instagram, it isn't a new idea. Sitting and talking to a camera with a professional camera equipment and a nice mic isn't a new idea. But I think people just didn't really want to do it because it wasn't really being done. And so, you know, us alongside a couple other people kind of started doing it. And now we're beginning to see a lot more people getting into that, where now people are getting more ideas in how they can begin progressing the sport forward. Obviously, not that we're pushing British powerlifting like it never has before or anything, but within certain realms like content, for example, we're also seeing other people like in the Northwest Division, they're really pushing the level of competition standards within divisionals. And as soon as they started doing it, they were, in my opinion, the biggest catalyst towards why regionals now across the country are doing so well, because other people saw the Northwest doing these really good divisionals, where even now we've got Manchester Open and all these other competitions that are beginning to get cash prizes and all of this stuff. People didn't almost just left it as a dream of, oh, it'd be really nice to do that. And then as soon as someone does it and people see it in front of their eyes as a reality, that's when people begin following suit. And I think it's just a case of trying to do that, really. Don't know where I was going with that.
That makes sense.
I think also just a couple other points to barrel off these guys, is that I think with powerlifting, with it being so new, there's a lot of unknowns, and a lot of people who come into the sport, there's not like a set way to get into the sport, right? And so it's a lot of like having to ask a lot of people, word of mouth, and the information is there, but it's not presented. And I think people, like I said, they fear the unknown. They don't want to go towards something they don't know about. And so that's something that also coupled with the fact of that a lot of people have a lot of complaints, right? In powerlifting, it's a lot of but why don't they do this? And why don't they do this? And that's completely fine, because they're just not educated on why these things can't be done, or why we're not currently there yet. And so I think being in that position, you know, when I first got into powerlifting, thinking, why is this not happening, and why is it not like this, and why don't more people know about it? To now being like, right, okay, let's be that change. Let's try and be that change of, we want to be the people that can be able to say to other people, okay, cool, if you see X, Y, and Z, and we'll cover these posts, and we'll talk about how to get into British powerlifting and how to get into your first competition and how to do this, and etc. etc. I think it'll draw more people in naturally, just with the awareness. And I think also, just back to your earlier question as well, is where the collaborations come in so nicely. And so again, growing together, I think, is the most important thing, where if we can get more eyes from different parties, then we're all feeding off each other and we're all growing together. And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what was really nice from you all chatting there was you can see it's coming from a place of just loving the sport, you know, having competed in it yourselves, as well as coaching. And one thing on that, when you all kind of touched on it a little bit there in terms of, you know, actually getting involved in, you know, powerlifting. Everyone goes to the gym, you know, and they'll do some form of squat, bench, and deadlift. Whereas if you're thinking about it as a sport, people will mention, oh, it's weightlifting because it's in the Olympics and it's a little bit more ready available. Do you think, and this might be a little bit of a tangent from what you said there, do you think in terms of actually getting involved in strength sports? Because I know for myself, I've had some clients that have got involved in powerlifting and then thought, do you know what, actually, I've got a big gap between competitions. I'm going to give strongman a go. And it can actually be a gateway to, other strength sports rather than, a lot of people see weightlifting and be like, oh no, I don't want to put that over my head. That's a little bit too much. Whereas actually, you look at powerlifting and, it's the exact same environment, if you like, in terms of everybody wants people to lift stronger, work on technique, but weightlifting is always seen as that more professional, even though it's in the Olympics. I hope that makes sense. But is that what you want to try and see a shift towards?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you raised that. So initially, when we first kind of sat down and talked through, okay, what direction are we going to really take this in? One of the initial ideas we had was to actually, and this is kind of, I guess, a little bit of the inspiration behind the name Barbell Coalition and why it wasn't specific to powerlifting or anything like that, was initially we did have an idea, and potentially this is something we'll look into in the future, of potentially bringing on these different strength sports, whether that's weightlifting, strongman, CrossFit, all of these different barbell sports, right? And bringing it all under one umbrella. Naturally,
collating under one umbrella.
Yeah, collating under one umbrella. Yeah. You could see who where that kind of name came from. But yeah, I think even just straight from the get-go, that's something that we were aware of, because having worked with individual athletes ourselves, like you said, you'll have those people that during a long period of not competing, they'll try a different sport or anything like that. There's always, I guess, that temptation for some people to be a little bit more versatile, and stuff like that. So that's one part of it. Yes, we have thought about that kind of shift. And the other thing that I have to give Mahin a lot of credit for here is he's straight from the get-go been very aware of different markets, not just within kind of our different markets as in powerlifting, weightlifting, etc., but also, for example, if we just focus on powerlifting in the UK versus powerlifting in the US. So Mahin has quite a lot of connections out in the US, and he's always been very aware of, I guess, the movement that they've made. That I think we'd all kind of collectively agree that the US is a little bit ahead of the UK currently in terms of where powerlifting is. So almost taking inspiration from a market that's ahead of where ours is currently has been really, really, I guess, instrumental to our growth, because we've been able to almost, I guess, I don't want to say predict, because we're not predicting, we're kind of borrowing ideas from different markets, but we've been able to almost feel like we're a step ahead at times, because we can almost see how this has played out in other markets. So yeah, again, that's just another dimension to that, I guess. If any of the other boys want to add to that.
Yeah, so 100%. Thank you, Steph, by the way. But yeah, no, it's definitely something that is always used as our market research. And so if something's been tried, something's been tested, something works, then I don't see why we can't try and implement it into our world in the UK. And I think there are so many ideas that we have that we really want to bring on, but it's just not there yet. We're just not there yet, and we have to play by eye. And sometimes we get ahead of ourselves of like, oh my god, like strobe lighting and all these smoke machines and all this stuff and all this jazz. But it's very, and I think that's also what comes with comparing markets as well. And I think with the crossover sport thing, with weightlifting or anything else, I think the first aspect of kind of teaching people about obviously how many times a year they can compete, and then us as coaches, I think it's our duty to make sure and inform people on why, and not only just saying, okay, you need to do this, that's why you need to do it because I said it. It's also backing it up with, we all like to go into like scientific studies. We like to bring out a lot of knowledge through there, and that also crosses over from the US as well. Like there's a lot of, like me and Steph, we're coached by Noriega, US coach, and a lot of that comes from making sure that we can inform people, but we're not opposed to the idea of people crossing over. Because I think another thing that's really important, I think everybody goes through this journey at some point in their like gym career, lifting career, is they try everything, or they try a few things, then dabble in a few things until they find something that works for them. Because I think that's the most important thing. A lot of people, you'll very rarely find someone who is successful in powerlifting or any sport for that matter that doesn't enjoy what they're doing. And so if you don't encourage people and encourage your athletes, because as a coach, it's our biggest duty to make sure that our athletes are happy, right? And if they're happy, then everything kind of just fits into place. That's kind of like the first domino to fall. And so if it means that they need to go and try something else, of course, in our hearts, we're like, no, stay, do a bit of powerlifting, just carry on. But if that's something that they need to do, then all for them. Like, I think we've all had athletes at some point that have left to join another sport or try another sport and are very happy. And so I think that's something that should be encouraged for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, because well, actually, what I was thinking about that, I've actually started listening to Conscious Coaching again by Brett Bartholomew. I literally listened to it, and there's a snippet in there where he says, it's not just, if you say, right, this is the program, this is what you got to do, why aren't people doing it? It's that case of, well, you need that social element of it, the psychological element of it. A little bit of a tangent, but I literally just listened to it before I jumped on here. With that as well, when we're talking about athletes who, they'll dip into strongman, do weightlifting, or, but then equally we've had, other athletes from other sports then come in to powerlifting. When we're looking at, because I know you've got, quite a lot of athletes who are competing at university, and I think it was you had a couple of athletes go to the university world championships. What are your thoughts on that, using that population to develop into longer term athletes in the sport? Because you look at the example that I'll use is, you look at, again, I'm just going to use Sheffield as an example, Tony Cliff at Sheffield, being in the sport a long time, but it's only really maybe over the last couple of years that people are realizing who these lifters are and being like, bloody hell, they've been competing, that long, and look where they've got. Whereas sometimes, you can have a look at some junior lifters do really well in the juniors, and then it's kind of where have they gone? Do you see, the university, the juniors building up into the opens to develop, longer term athletes in the sport, if that makes sense?
Yeah, for sure. It's a tricky one, right? It's always going to be a tricky one because I think there's a couple of perspectives to this. Number one, right, it does help to be in the sport for an extended period of time, right? It does help because you'll almost grow attached to it. You have all this kind of time invested in it. Well, or if you're a powerlifter, you have a lot of money invested into it as well with all the equipment changes, all of that kind of stuff. So it definitely does help, right? But like you said, you do very often see people almost like flash in the pan, right? Where they'll burst onto the scene out of nowhere almost. They've only been going to the gym for like a year and they're already competing kind of at the top of the sport. And people are already throwing out things like, oh, they're going to be like top lifter in the world, all of this kind of stuff, right? And then all of a sudden they just disappear, right? And I think there's a couple reasons for that, right? I think number one, when you're obviously there's a pressure element, right? When you're instantly thrown into a sport and all of a sudden you're at the top level, right? There is definitely a pressure element to that. It's almost you feel like you need to keep that up. And this is, I guess, the benefit of being in the sport for a longer period of time, or perhaps not necessarily starting off at a really, really high level, is spending that prolonged period of time making incremental improvement can often be such a valuable tool for someone. Just because if you don't have that period of time where you have to really, really struggle and really, really work for things. I'm not saying the people that kind of flash onto the scene don't work for things. Of course, they work for it. And usually, just to touch on your previous point, they also have some extensive sporting background previous to powerlifting. But when you really have to, I guess, slowly build your total, build your lifts, you're naturally going to run into issues in terms of injuries, in terms of plateaus, in terms of all of these things. It almost teaches you a level of grit, for lack of a better word, right? Where if you don't have that period of time, you might not, you might fall at the first hurdle, basically, where you won't know how to work around that necessarily. You won't know how long to expect for this period to last, this period of low training. And that can, I've seen that time and time again, that can be the catalyst for people leaving the sport, changing sport. And then, like you said, there's other people who just, they almost, they go through the lowest of the lows for such a long period of time. An example I can think of, and you guys might know about this, is a lifter called Ben Cullen, who, as a sub junior, was at the top of the level in the 105s, and then over the period of about a year or two, he basically he cut a bunch of weight, and his training was just in the toilet, for lack of a better word, right, for a very prolonged period of time, and he was still posting his training along this entire period. And I just remember seeing him lifting like weights that he'd usually just destroy, and he was lifting them and they were so hard, like so difficult. He lost a bunch of strength and he was just still going. And I was like, okay, first of all, for a sub-junior lifter, this is not very common to see. Like I said, they haven't been in the sport for quite as long. So usually they don't have that, again, that grit, I guess. But he was just going and going and going. And then over a period of, as I said, like a year or 2 years, he built himself back up, and now he's obviously at all-time strength. He's competing at the junior championships in 4 weeks or so. And I think that's just like a textbook story of, I guess, someone who has now built up that period of time where they've gone through the dip of their training and they've just kind of worked through that. And yeah, it's unique. It is unique to see that. So just to go back to wrap this all up, to your original question, I think there's a couple elements to making, I guess, creating long-term lifters. And I think the biggest thing is obviously time, but then also the education around, if you are going through a dip in your training, why is that happening? How do you work around? What's kind of the time expectation for that? Because it's not always one-to-one. It's not, oh, you have this injury, you'll be over it in X amount of time, right? So that experience and that education around that piece, I think, is the most important thing. Sorry, I rambled on for quite a long time there, so I'll hand on.
No. Mahin, Ibi, any thoughts on that?
I think powerlifting is very unique in the aspect of how it plays out. As a sport, it's just so different. You get 2 or 3 opportunities a year to showcase your strength, to showcase how good you are. It's not like, right, lads, we've got a footy game. Oh, we didn't do too well. Well, you know what? We've always got next week, right? It's not like that. And I think that is a very big factor for a lot of people. Just leading on to what Stephan was saying, you might have 1, 2 bad meets. That's 1 year gone, just finished. And that is enough for someone to say, I'm packing it in. I don't want to do this anymore. It's a lot of work. And especially in this generation where it's, gratification straight away, constant dopamine, constant, saying you're good, everything's good. I think people have, like Stephan said, lost that grit. And someone like a Tony Cliff who's been in the sport for so long, he's built that up for so long as well. I think this is such a massive question. I'll try not to be too big with it. But it's also, for example, life gets in the way a lot. And because powerlifting such an objective, like it's just numbers, right? It's not you have a chance to win this game because this person might be doing bad, or you're running through tournaments or something like this. It's just straight numbers. And if the numbers aren't going up, a lot of people don't want to carry on because the numbers just aren't going up. And I think also there is such a massive gap in the sport because it's still in the baby stages of, you are either really, really good or you are the rest of the people in GB. There's no levels. And I think that demoralizes a lot of people. It demoralizes a lot of people. Then, you compound this with no money in the sport and no form of affirmation for people at different levels of the sport as well. For example, if you are in the middle of the echelon, right? So you've got like a 400 to 500, like I'm not going to use Wilks dots, right? And then you're going to get way less appreciation than the people who are 500 above. And they're going to have like all the appreciation. So like all the cash prizes, making the GB team, which is probably the only thing right now, which is the biggest thing at the moment that people kind of strive for, which is I want to make the GB team, right? And that's not bad. There's no levels to go up. It's just I'm either a regional national lifter or I'm team GB. And I think if you collate all these points, it does require a lot of grit for someone to be like, I love this sport enough to carry on going to where potentially I could make the GB team at some point in my life, even if it's as a Masters 2, right? But it's one of those where and this is something that we are really trying to bring into the sport, where people are appreciated at every level. And there's also, not to go too much into something that hopefully we will be releasing soon, but it's teaching the pathway of sport of the learning, training, and development, which is something that's very prominent in other sports. They have levels, right? So they have you've got the region. So, for example, if you take cricket, right? My sport before this was cricket. So you have club level, semi-pro, pro, county, and then you make the England team. That's 5 possible, rankings to go through to get to the top. And then inside that, you've got like the IPL, and you've got like county championships, and you've got other tournaments that you can get selected for, which you get money for, and all these things. But I think incentivizing powerlifting is a very big goal for us, to make people feel a bit more appreciated, for people to want to carry on the sport for a lot longer, and to be like the Tony Cliffs. And then, because another thing as well is that you see a lot of lifters that shine a lot in their peak, which is in their 30s. And if you have someone coming into the sport for only 2-3 years and showcasing, he's like, absolutely blasting everyone in the weight class, it's scary to think what they would be if they were getting to the 30s. And I can attest to Stephan and Ibrahim as well. When we started the sport, the whole community has completely changed. People you thought were going to be in the sport for a very long time are just not there anymore. And every year, they just seem to be dropping like flies. So I think that's retention's a very big metric for us in our company anyway. And I think in the sport, it's definitely something that hopefully will improve, and we can drive forward as well.
Nice. Maybe your thoughts on that?
I'm going to be so honest. They both hit the nail on the head, and I think I'll be a dead horse.
Well, with that, because we've spoken about grit, people who have maybe started off in the juniors or wherever it may be, maybe a little bit older, and then have kind of fallen by the wayside, moving away from the bigger picture, if you like, focusing on you guys. How, with the athletes that you're working with, who, because I know there's quite a lot of university powerlifting clubs now, which when I was at university, there wasn't that there. It was only when I left uni and started training with other people that I actually found out about powerlifting. What's your approaches to developing that long-term buy-in? Because obviously you've all mentioned individual coaches by yourself. Working as a team now, you all might have different approaches. It's the exact same with the coaches that I've worked with and know sometimes people's different approaches. What's kind of your ethos, if you like, about being like, look, this is a longer term thing, rather than being like, right, we're going to do this block and we're going to achieve everything and you're going to get onto the GB team. What's your approach with that? Because when we're talking about having something, more professional, you mentioned there, Martin, about obviously the cricket levels. It's the same with football. We've got a footballer in the gym. He's actually on loan from I think it's a League 2 club, and he's gone down to like a semi-pro club, but he's got a specific target of, this is what you need to work on. We need to hit this, and then you can then go back up to there. what's kind of your processes or strategies when it comes to working with athletes at university level to then, think bigger picture?
I guess there's a couple different levels to it. All of us also went to uni and were quite involved in our clubs and made the changes to the sport within unis while we were actually at uni. And one of the main things that when I was on the University of Nottingham committee, big up Nathan, who was the president that year and did absolute crazy bits. Pleasure working with him, by the way. Was to begin introducing the concept of club coaching, because that wasn't really even a thing that existed in university powerlifting at that point. And this was at about, I think it was 2021. It was just after, it was the year after COVID started. So it was quite difficult to begin implementing all these things, but we were at this inflection point where a lot of people were wanting to get into powerlifting at uni, and we needed to facilitate that, which is where we made sure that if you join a university club, firstly, we need to facilitate you to be able to get the full powerlifting experience for minimal cost, right? We all know when we're at uni, we're broke, right? And we don't want to spend even for, a lower price coach at like £40 a month, never mind someone who's charging triple digits. You just don't want to pay that for something that you aren't even fully committed to at this point. You're just interested. And if you go to any other sports club, you go in, you pay a membership for the year, and you get coaching, you get advice, you get all of this stuff, and no university clubs really had that. So yeah, firstly, we made sure that as part of people's memberships, you get a program for the year, and that's a program that the coach would write for that year for the club that would take you to all the major competitions for the club that year. So whether that is, in our case, it was the North Mids Uni Champs, which was a regional uni qualifier, following then into Bucks, following then into whatever summer divisionals or summer competitions were on after uni finished. And that gave people a lot of good direction, because obviously they didn't just have to follow random programs. Although Candito 6 week is great, and I know Mahin loves it. On top of that, it was also giving them the actual coaching experience itself. And what we did for that was, I can't remember the details off the top of my head, but again, for a very small price, they then have access to an online coach who was there for us for the club. And that was, I don't know if it still is in the club, but Robin, who absolute goat in the sport, by the way. He taught me and Mahin a lot of things. But obviously he was a great choice for that, and he's really good at working with beginners and telling them, taking them from where they are, communicating with them in a way that they understand, in order to begin inspiring a love for the sport in them as well as teaching them. And that's where, again, they don't have to fork out a huge amount of money, but again, they still pretty much have a full-time coach. Why? Because they're following a program, that's a club program, and then they get access to this coach who can give them advice and stuff like that. And that's how we kind of facilitated the powerlifting experience for those athletes without them having to then fork a load of money, essentially. And then for those who did end up wanting to take it properly, we have coach recommendations that they can go to. And naturally, we have our connections in powerlifting, and we take them to the right people. And that's how we kind of bridge the gap in universities from, I'm interested, what is this, to, okay, you're now fully competing and everything. And obviously we sorted handling and stuff as well. And kind of the other side to it as well, and this is a lot more, I suppose, what we're focusing on now, especially since this kind of club coaching models really is gone all across the country, which is awesome, is the idea of focusing on that longer term athlete development. And this is something that I can't speak in too much detail on, purely because there's going to be plenty coming out on that front from
a little bit of a teaser.
There's going to be plenty coming out on that front, but it's that case of, you said there are multiple levels, so let's showcase those multiple levels. Let's educate people on that, and part of that is obviously facilitating competitions to do that. Let's make competitions at various levels that people actually want to go to, as well as educating the athletes on what the various levels of powerlifting are. Because right now it's, okay, I'm going into powerlifting, therefore I'm already aiming to be Team GB. Whereas the first stage of powerlifting is, okay, how do I actually pick up a barbell? How do I actually lift? How do I lift with the correct technique? Stuff like that. And it graduates from there. And I guess within our current role as coaches for longer term development is, when we have our consultations with our athletes, and again, this is part of their professionalism, as you said, and kind of communication, is that it's not just a case of, hey, so do you squat low bar or high bar? Okay, cool, it's low bar. Okay, you bench with a big arch and you pull sumo. Okay, great. I'll write you a program. We'll chat next week. Okay, so here's a payment link. Instead, we have a chat to the athlete, make sure that we know their full background, not just within powerlifting, but within sport and just in general, knowing a bit more about that person, understand what their goals truly are beyond just, yes, you're powerlifting because you want to get stronger. That's a given. But beyond that, what actually is it to you, right? Because for some people, it's they have very busy long days and they want to get their head fully stuck in something completely different. And it's a consistent thing where they have big goals and they want to do it every day. For some people, it's just a hobby. They want to go in, they want to socialize, and obviously everywhere in between. But anyway, where I'm getting at is that with that, we want to understand what their longer term goals are so that we can then facilitate that. So that instead of saying, okay, we're writing this block with the goal of accumulating or whatever, instead it's, okay, well, we know that in order to get you to this goal that you want to get to within the next, not just few months, but next year, next 2 years, we need to start at building this foundation. And that's where it kind of comes to just communication and letting the athlete understand what our thought process is beyond just do this, here's a program, you build some volume, you'll get stronger, do it. Instead, it's like we're working to develop you in the longer term so that you can sustainably continue powerlifting. And this is something that, to be honest, before we had a big focus on it, Forza, Louis from Forza was very, very big on this. And one of their values is the whole longevity, right? And it's something that was quite inspiring from him to make sure that instead of just focusing on let's get an athlete by just giving them a short-term gratification of saying, yeah, I'll get you stronger, I'll get you this big total. Instead saying, okay, well, we are the professionals. We're not going to just cater towards some type of short-term gratification. We know what's best for you. Therefore, let's have that chat and ensure that as a professional, we communicate that with you. And so far, it's been doing quite well. And we're definitely seeing a lot of our athletes who have been with us for quite some time have been getting a lot of consistent, great development. But anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but
I like that. I think the biggest thing is what my train of thought went to is that you look at quite a lot of just speaking for the Yorkshire and North East, going to competitions, and I took a lifter to the novice competition, and there's a lot of people that just don't know what to do, don't have a handler, just look a little bit confused, and then in the end, people or coaches there who have taken their client, their athlete there, and then trying to like look after other people. And I think the whole thing from there is, I had a conversation about this the other day. Powerlifting can look very intimidating and scary from the outside, whereas everything that you've said about there, I said it right at the start, it's kind of like coming a little bit full circle, if you like. You're doing all this because it's a sport that you love, that you enjoy, and you want other people to do that, and ultimately you're just looking after the athletes that you're bringing in, and the longer that they can go into that, and if they feel as though this is what you're going to do for your competition, this is what's going to happen. I think you shared a video with British Powerlifting about what actually happens on a competition day, because sometimes people are just caught in the headlights, and I think tying that the fact of this is the level of professionalism that we're gonna look after you, but this is the level of professionalism that you're gonna get. It's a little bit like that grit. It's teaching those things. The longer term picture of look, we've got 2 meets. This is how we're gonna build up to it. Rather than mention there, you got 2 meets, and then if you have 2 bad meets, don't go very well. That's then people lost to the spot, as opposed to building that crop of lifters that can envision going to aspiring to GB or the other level or anything like that, especially as competitions are leveling up a little bit, which is great to see. Quite a lot of topics and tangents thrown in there, but the last question that I like to ask, and I'll throw this out there, is from everything that we've chatted about there, for everyone listening who might be coaches or lifters, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
Big question there to finish up. I'd say so a few things. Number one, I think the biggest thing that's, I guess, a blocker for a lot of people is, and this gets thrown around all the time, is that imposter syndrome. Not feel, and I know for a fact, I don't even have to ask you guys, I know for a fact we've all gone through it. We probably still go through it at times. And I'm here to tell you it never gets better. It's always going to kind of be present. You're always going to go through those moments where you feel, should I be in the position that I'm in? Like, why should, basically it comes from because powerlifting's so up and down all the time for people, like especially if you have a broad roster of athletes, you're going to have ups and downs with different people during different periods. There's going to be periods of time where you'll feel like I'm the best coach on the planet, everything's going well, right? Everyone's making crazy progress. And then other times where maybe a couple people have kind of bad sessions or anything like that, and you're like, oh my God, everything's going badly, I'm a terrible coach, right? Back to the drawing board type thing. So first bit of advice would be understanding that it's kind of a constant thing, imposter syndrome, and the way to work around it, I guess, is to try as much as possible to focus on all the positives that you have delivered as a coach, whether that be to your athletes, whether that be to other coaches, whether that be literally to just another person that just does powerlifting, you've given a bit of advice and it's really helped them. Try and focus on those, because the downs are inevitable in this sport, whether that's as an athlete or as a coach. The downs are inevitable. You're never going to go through your entire powerlifting career or your powerlifting coaching career with no downs. Not going to happen. So that's the first thing, would just be understanding that that's going to be part and parcel of it. So to build off that, the other thing would be, as a coach, making sure that you are getting your perspective out there so that people know what you're about. People know, even if they don't agree with you, and that's another thing, people won't always agree with you, and that's fine. You mentioned earlier, sort of, there's still lots of old school trains of thought. Ultimately, right, and this conversation I had the other week was, if we take a look at something like Westside Barbell, right, I know that gets a lot of criticism nowadays, right, for the very old school methods. If we are to break it down and look at what they're actually talking about, right? So you get a West Side coach and be like, oh, speed work is essential for this, blah, blah, blah. Right. And then you have the modern coach saying, no, speed work is pointless. You don't really need that. Right. It's all coming from the same thing, right? Because you can repackage that speed work and say, oh, you're just moving lighter weights. That's all it is. Right. Now, naturally, the lens that you're looking at that from is different, which is why there's going to be a lot of disagreement. But ultimately, you're looking at the same variables. You're looking at the same things. It's 3 lifts, right? So getting your perspective out there is super, super important, because number one, it carries the conversation forward, right? We don't have a conversation with people that aren't airing their thoughts. The disagreements are really, really useful, really useful. Some of the best strides that I've made in my coaching have come off the back of major disagreements on certain points, right? And I'm sure you guys feel the same, because it gets you thinking. Essentially, the conversation always goes something like this. I think this, you think this, we completely disagree. And then you start slowly working down, and you realize, oh, we're kind of talking about the same thing, just slightly different angles on it. So that's why I think it's super, super important to air your thoughts and get your opinions out there, because ultimately that's what's going to move the sport forward. And you see it comes and goes in waves. I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to bang on too hard about that. I'll leave it at that for my 2 points. But yeah, it would be understanding the imposter syndrome, and then also just getting your thoughts out there, getting your content out there so people know what you're about.
Nice.
I think I was going to cover one of those points, Steph, so I'm going to do something completely different. So I think, not to go too cliche with it, but comparison is a thief of joy. So I think that's definitely the biggest thing I would say to coaches and athletes. Just enjoy your journey. And that ties into the imposter syndrome of, it doesn't matter where anyone else is at. It doesn't matter what other people are doing. Enjoy your journey, because that's the most important thing. And I can tell you from personal experience, and you can ask literally any powerlifter ever, total they've been chasing for so long that they eventually ends up being like, oh, cool. And then the next day it's like, right, so I'm going to go for this now. So it's like, it's never enjoying the journey and enjoying all the learning and all the friendships and all the good things that come out of it. That's probably point one, I'd say. And the second point, which is actually an Islamic quote as well, which is one eye to see the good in others and one eye to see the bad in yourself, which means when you are looking at other people, always try to take the positives out of them and see what they're doing good. And if there are any bad things that you see that other people may not be doing that you think you could be doing, look at that within yourself. And if you're not doing those things, then you should start doing those things. So I think it's a lot of making sure that you look at all the good in a lot of people, because powerlifting has a lot to give. Every single person is so different and they have so many positives about them. Some people, their methods, like Stephan was saying, the different methods that people coach in, the different methods that people lift in, the different cues, all these things, and why it's so important to take it upon yourself to go out there and learn as much as you can from different people. And that's where kind of the collaborations come in and everybody's growing together kind of thing as well. But I'm just going to pass it over to Ibi just to get his thoughts as well.
No, I completely agree with both your points, lads. And the thing that there's two main things that I want to bring as well, which is firstly, if you have ideas, just do. I know Mahin and Steph are sick of hearing this because I've been banging on about it for over a year, but we've spoken to so many people in the community who have genuinely incredible ideas, right? Just do, like, just execute, do what your idea is, fail fast. And if you don't fail, then you've succeeded in it, right? You just need to do, because if you don't end up executing on an idea, it stays as an idea. And I can't remember who said it, but if you want your dreams to come true, then you need to wake up, right? So instead of kind of just constantly dreaming about things, like, honestly, everyone who we've spoken to that has had an idea, the idea is great. The reason it doesn't exist is because no one's doing it. So honestly, just do. No one cares the way you think they do. Like, we've tried so many things already where firstly, people haven't even realized that we were trying something new. And if they have, maybe a couple jokes about it not working have flown about. Like, I remember one of the videos that I put quite early up on the BC page was actually this angle, and I was looking at the screen like that, and it just didn't work. It didn't work. It was the worst video we put up, and it was very funny, right? But we tried it, and there are a million other things that we've tried that have worked and haven't worked, right? And so no one actually cares, and so you just need to do, right? That was the first thing, and the second thing is to build on top of that, get a team. If you have ambition somewhere, if you want to build something great, or even you just want to build something, right? Just get a team, because everyone has a slightly different edge to them, and no one can succeed the same way themselves as they would without a team. Me, Steph, and Mahin individually have very different strengths. Some of it overlaps, but where I'm not quite as strong in certain things, Steph or Mahin would be able to pick that up. And so together we create this one package that can just constantly move forward and keep the ball rolling. And like, I can trust Steph or Mahin to take care of certain things because it's just not my strength. They'll do it best, and I'll focus on something else, right? Which they can't do quite as well, and I can. And yeah, just when you get a team and you just fully trust them, it changes the way that you see your work, it changes the way that you see your business, it changes the way that you see your relationships, and it's so important. I know that's not quite coaching specific or athlete specific, but they're just two important points that I want to touch on. Those are my thoughts.
Absolutely. I think there was some pearls of wisdom there from you all. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Really enjoyed chatting with you all. Like I say, I think the content that you're putting out there is really cool. And really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. The last thing, people have got questions, want to see the content you put out there, or get involved in coaching with you. Where can people find you?
Who wants to say that? At Barbell Coalition on Instagram is probably the best place.
Awesome.
Or individually, we'll send you our individual Instagrams after this, and you can pop those in the description as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Steve.
It's been a pleasure.